Well, thank you for joining me for my presentation, The Great Lakes Region, Why the Great Lakes Are So Great. I am Ashley Deming. I am the Director of Education and Administration at the Michigan Maritime Museum in South Haven. I have been with the museum for 7 years now, but my background is an undergraduate degree in anthropology from Western Michigan University and a master's degree in maritime archaeology and history from the University of Bristol in England. I joined the museum in 2015 to tackle some of their education programs and other programming there, and it's been wonderful ever since. I absolutely love working for the Michigan Maritime Museum. So I'm so glad that we can share this information and some of the interesting facts about the Great Lakes with you today. So here's some fun facts about the Great Lakes. The name Michigan is actually French from an Ojibwa word, Michigama, meaning large water or large lake. Makes sense, we have a lot of it. The total surface area is over 95,000 square miles with 3,288 miles of coastline. The Great Lakes represent 20% of the world's fresh water, and that's 6 quadrillion gallons. I don't know about you, but I don't even know what a quadrillion is. It's not a number we come across, but it's pretty substantial, and that really means we could have enough water to cover North and South America with 1 foot of water just from the Great Lakes alone. Great Lakes borders 7 states and 1 Canadian province, being Ontario, and contain 35,000 islands. Manitoulin Island and Lake Huron, which you can see there on this old map, is the long yellow island there. That is the largest island in a freshwater lake in the world. So we have that claim to fame too. So here's sort of a profile that you can see the different depths of the lakes. The lakes were formed by glacial recession about 10,000 years ago. Lake Superior is the largest freshwater lake in the world. It's also the deepest of the Great Lakes at about 1,300 feet. And Lake Michigan is the only Great Lake entirely within the United States. It doesn't border another country, being Canada. That comes into play a little bit during World War II, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. We certainly have a lot of fish, and there's a lot of fishing. So the Great Lakes are home to over 177 fish species. There are 139 native species and at least 34 non-native species. Non-native doesn't necessarily mean invasive, so we can talk about that a little bit later. The largest fish is the lake sturgeon, but we've got salmon, walleye, trout, muskie, other species that are very popular with recreational fishing, but we also have commercial fishing, not quite as prevalent as it has been in the past, but still going on in many areas of the Great Lakes, including upper Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, and into Superior. So lake whitefish, walleye, perch, and Cisco make up most of the commercial fishing industry right now. Commercial, recreational, and tribal fisheries are collectively valued at $7 billion annually and support more than 75,000 jobs. So it really is an industry and certainly of value to the Great Lakes economically. Invasive species. So we definitely have some invasive species. This means they come from other places, they're not native, and they end up doing some damage, if not a lot of damage, to our native species and the ecosystems that they infiltrate. So some of the ones that you're looking at here are the most prevalent in the Great Lakes. We've got zebra mussels. There's also the quagga mussel as well. We have sea lamprey, which you can see on the right. And then we're worried a little bit about Asian carp. We have found DNA for the Asian carp in the Great Lakes, but we don't quite yet have a massive problem with that at this time. That may come. So hopefully we'll come up with a little bit better solution. Many of these invasive species are introduced in a variety of ways to the Great Lakes, but one of them was ballast water from larger ships that were coming over from places like Asia, Europe, that kind of thing. Historic commercial fishing. So this was a predominant industry in the Great Lakes in the 19th and 20th centuries. As we kind of talked about when you saw the slide about fishing, we've got whitefish, lake trout, perch, and cisco, which is also known as lake herring, and chubs being the most popular commercial fish throughout those periods. There was a really high demand on the fisheries during World War II period, which put strain on the fish populations. And then between invasive species that were coming in just probably a little bit before that and since then, and pollution that was a factor from a lot of the industrialization during World War II. And then when we look at Lake Erie, maybe some of Lake Ontario, just the Industrial Revolution, and not quite understanding how those things impacted our waterways. There is a lot of impact on fish populations from those things. So pressure during World War II, invasive species, and some of the pollutants that changed the water chemistry affected how commercial fishing could be economically viable in the Great Lakes. There were also changes later to the historic commercial or to commercial fishing industry, where commercial fishermen had to go from gill nets to trap nets, other things to try and bounce back those fish populations once we had a better understanding. Because a lot of these businesses were small family-run businesses, the change in the fishing where they had to go farther out into the lake meant they had to use more fuel. Then they had to change boats because of the difference in how the nets functioned. And that forced a lot of the small businesses out of business. So there's still tribal fisheries active and some commercial fishing licenses. I believe the last number I had from the DNR was about 1,500 licenses, commercial fishing licenses in total for the Great Lakes for Michigan. But really by the 1970s, 1980s, the industry had really collapsed as far as commercial fishing goes. So we really don't see a lot of that happening on the Great Lakes anymore. The picture that here is of a local South Haven boat, LCJ, going out still within the winter time to really get as much as they possibly could into the season there. So LCJ actually is still operational, not as a commercial fishing vessel, but it is still owned by the Jensen family who had it built in 1945. We'll use South Haven because that's where the museum is, sort of as an example of small port towns all around Michigan. South Haven had a lot of stuff going on as a commercial port, as a recreational harbor. So, and that's what we have in our collection. So that's why you're going to see a lot of pictures related to South Haven, but it really is a microcosm for things that were happening all over the Great Lakes. You can see Jensen's Fish House with smoked fish. There's commercial fishermen sorting out a net, a gill net after a storm. And then Evelyn S., which operated out of Muskegon for a while as a gill net fish tug. So there you can see LCJ now, and she's decked out a little bit as a pirate vessel because the Jensens are kind enough to use LCJ as the pirates during the pirate chaser sales that the museum offers for children along with our tall ship. But only some small modifications from when it was built in 1945, and now it really they use it for public charters out on the Great Lakes. Evelyn S., which you saw a historic picture of in the previous slide, that is a museum exhibit now, a really wonderful example of commercial fishing industry. It was built in 1939, and that is now something that we allow people to go aboard and use as an exhibit to talk about commercial fishing. The buildings on the bottom left there are old Jensen fishery buildings they used for net sheds and storage and little meeting space. The Jensens opened their commercial fishery, I believe in 1932, and that was operational up until the 80s. When the commercial fishing industry really did collapse, the museum has purchased that historic property from the Jensen family, and we're renovating those spaces as exhibits. LCJ, Evelyn S., these buildings are all part of the Great Lakes Fisheries Heritage Trail, which goes all around the Great Lakes, promoting that heritage, including active vessels that are commercial fishing today. Highly recommend you visit the website for a Great Lakes Fisheries Heritage Trail, and there are oral histories on there. There's maps on there, places that you could go and visit. So lots of great information if you are interested in historic commercial fishing. All right, Great Lakes vessels. There are a lot of vessels that have been used on the Great Lakes. I'm sure we won't cover absolutely everything today, but just a variety throughout time that are representational of all of the activity on the water for the Great Lakes. So canoes, probably the first types of vessels that are used on the Great Lakes. We have Native American vessels, both birch bark and dugout. You're looking at dugout in birch bark right now. Surrett Nature Center out of Benton Harbor, that they operate the birch bark canoe that you can see. It's actually fiberglass, which makes it last a little bit longer, but they're able to take people out and do an experience with them as a voyageur canoe. So it's a really great part of history that they can help bring to life, and the museum collaborates and partners with them with that on occasion. The dugouts can actually be both Native American, a burn and scrape technique to create the dugout, as well as historic, using tools and things like that. And we've seen dugout canoes even up until the 1930s and 40s being used as small vessels for people to get around kind of just along the coast or for short distances. We've seen them with mast steps for sails. I've seen them with the capability to have outboard motors put on them. So very versatile, something that someone could make themselves as a vernacular craft. Tall ships. Who doesn't love tall ships, right? Beautiful, majestic. The museum has one, Friends Goodwill. That's the one in the middle there. It is a replica of a vessel that was built over in the Detroit area in the River Rouge in 1810. It was built as a merchant vessel, but also was then captured by the British at Mackinac during the War of 1812 and used for the British during the Battle of Lake Erie. During that battle, Oliver Hazard Perry and his squadron recaptured Friends Goodwill, and then it was burned shortly thereafter to keep it away from the British, or the British keeping it away from the Americans. There's two schools of thought there, but a really good example of one of the first larger vessels built on the Great Lakes to really kind of open it up for trade and moving passengers and people, that sort of thing. Tall ships were used again as long as possible into the 30s and 40s, not obviously with a decline in them as we use things like steam and gasoline and that sort of thing. But a lot of cargo was moved on these vessels. We've got wheat and corn and lumber and coal and all sorts of things that are moved on tall ships, and they come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. Schooners being the most common one that we have seen on the Great Lakes. Friends Goodwill is a sloop with a single mast there. So there's a lot of resources out there if you're interested in Great Lakes tall ships. Online that you can go take a look at if you want to learn a little bit more about them. Steamships. As we move forward through time and technology, we're looking at much larger vessels carrying a lot of people. While these definitely carried cargo, a lot of them were really moving people. There's a golden age of steam where it's luxury travel. These are floating palaces on the water, very ornate inside, lots of amenities. And they visited a whole lot of ports, taking tourists for the summer, for a day, for a weekend. South Haven had a lot of tourists from Chicago, we still do, that came for the day, or would come and stay at the resort communities along the lakeshore, getting out of the hullabaloo of the cities and getting some fresh air is really what that was all about. So you can see a few different vessels. There were side wheel steamers in addition to these propeller steamers that you see, but very, very popular vessels on the Great Lakes for quite some time. Launches. You could sort of think of these as the river taxis, water taxis of their time. They had steam launches, electric launches. We're looking at closer to the turn of that century there. So late 1800s into the 1920s for these. They, most of the time, were going to meet the steamers at the dock that couldn't get farther up the river and offload luggage, offload passengers, and then take them from there to their destinations where the steamships couldn't quite get up that far into shallows of river systems, taking people farther inland for their vacation or holiday or picnic or what have you. The picture on the top left is Lindy Lou. That is the museum's river cruiser. She is a replica of a Truscott river launch. Truscott was a boat building company out of St. Joe. And it is electric. It was in the World's Fair, I believe in the 1893, don't quote me on that exact date, World's Fair, where they introduced these electric launches. So she is battery operated, and we take people up the river with her daily in the summertime. The picture on the top right of the river launch there and the roller coaster is actually the site of the museum in the early 1900s, where they had a roller coaster, they had Chautauqua tent, they had Fatima, scientific palmist and clairvoyant, which is very exciting. So sometimes when things get busy and the museum refers to itself as a circus, when we look back at this amusement park, that feels very true. And then, of course, seeing that river launch there and us having Lindy Lou is such a wonderful connection, a really great way that we can connect people with history right on that site. Freighters. Still operating on the Great Lakes today, lots of cargo, and we have a lot of natural resources in the Great Lakes, so they're still moving a lot. We've got self unloaders, whalebacks, just a lot of different types. Most of the activity for freighters, while we see them a little bit in Lake Michigan, is happening a little bit over on the other side of the state and into Lake Superior. So that's really where we're seeing a lot of freighter activity still today. If you head on over to Port Huron, you'll see a constant stream of freighters in and out there between the border of Michigan and Canada. And we can't forget about our recreational craft or small craft. So there are any numbers of these. We're only going to talk about a few. These are some examples that the museum has in their small craft collection. So on the left is Bernita. She is an R-class racing yacht from 1921. That is something the museum has. She's celebrating her 100th birthday this year, so we had a big party for her. And we do still, on a limited basis, take people out on Bernita to sail. On the right, you can see the Lightning sailboats. These are very, very, very popular boats for individuals to sail. South Haven, you see South Haven Yacht Club there. They often had fleets in many small towns of Lightnings that would have different races and regattas. South Haven was the headquarters for all Lightning class sailboats in the 1940s. So these are something that were very, very popular with individual owners. And I'm sure that many of you are familiar or even sailed a Lightning in your youth. We get to the beautiful, mahogany boats that were so popular after World War II, a little bit certainly before that, but very popular again in the 1940s and 50s. We have a 1929 Chris Craft Cadet at the Museum Maritime. That's what you see there on the bottom. There's some speed races over in Detroit with other Chris Craft vessels there. And we have a 1950s Snipe as well, another popular small craft in the Great Lakes. This really, like I said, is just a smattering of a lot of the small craft that we have that will soon be on display in a new exhibit for the Michigan Maritime Museum. All right, Great Lakes vessels in World War II. The Great Lakes and Lake Michigan in particular was very busy for the war effort. There was a lot of shipbuilding happening. On Lake Michigan, there were almost 800 ships built for the war effort. Dashiell Carter on the right built that vessel there. They transitioned from building other ships to military vessels. Chris Craft did that. Truscott did that. So lots of companies just changed over, as we all know, from war effort in other ways, but boat builders did the same thing. The top left is the Escanaba, which is a Coast Guard vessel. That left, during its lifetime, mostly operated on the Great Lakes. During World War II, actually operated in the Atlantic and was sunk by a German torpedo. So there was the battle cry of "Remember the Escanaba" during World War II. Interestingly, we also had two aircraft carriers that were used for training. They were old sidewheel steamers that were converted into aircraft carriers for Marine and Navy pilot training. The idea was if they could train on narrower, shorter aircraft carriers in the safety of the Great Lakes, they would be able to take off and land from aircraft carriers anywhere in the world. The reason that they chose to do this within Lake Michigan, and a lot of what they did in Lake Michigan, is because, as I mentioned really early on in the presentation, it is the only Great Lake entirely within the United States. So they didn't have to worry about espionage from other countries, being Canada. Why we were worried about Canada, I don't know, but Lake Michigan was totally protected in that way. So there was a lot of activity that happened there. We built submarines and took them out through the Mississippi and the Gulf of Mexico on Lake Michigan. So lots of things happening specifically on Lake Michigan because of that safety perspective. We can't forget about the Coast Guard and the Life-Saving Service. So the United States Life-Saving Service was established in 1878. These were folks that would walk up along the beach. They did trainings. They made sure that people were safe, boats were safe. They did patrols 24/7, just protecting the safety, and it was all volunteer-based. They merged with the United States Revenue Cutter Service in 1915, which created the United States Coast Guard. The motto is Semper Paratus, which means always ready. And then right now there are 16 active Coast Guard stations in Michigan. There are 30 along all of the Great Lakes. So that should kind of give you a little bit of an idea of how protected the Great Lakes are. I know there's one in Grand Haven. There's another one in Holland, or there's a temporary one in Holland. I think they've closed that station down. South Haven's station was deactivated in 1973, and so St. Joe is the closest Coast Guard station to us in South Haven. They cover quite an area, and they've partnered with us on a few things, including our Coast Guard Cleanup Day, where we polish the brass and clean up the boats and exhibits and honor the Coast Guard and the life-saving service of the past. 2019 was the 80th anniversary of the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. So often if they decommissioned a station, the auxiliary stepped up. So this is a group of volunteers and their personal boats, but when they are called into service, their boat and their personnel are active Coast Guard and conducting active military service and duties. So it's a really interesting system, and that is all volunteer based as well. And we are very proud of the Coast Guard Auxiliary that we have in South Haven. What a great group of people, and we love collaborating with them on a variety of things. So here's just some images of the Coast Guard and Life-Saving Service. The top guy there, he doesn't look very happy about his shore patrol, but that was part of his duty with the Life-Saving Service. We have Coast Guard over on the top left conducting a drill with their 26-foot pulling surf boat. If we go kind of around the circle there, the bottom left picture is of the Merriman. That is a type of life-saving service vessel. 1881 is the date, and as far as we know, that's the last remaining type of its kind for the life-saving service, and we've got it there at the museum. The picture on the bottom right is of South Haven's Coast Guard station. I believe that was in the 50s, if I'm remembering the date of this particular picture. While the Coast Guard station, was moved from the north side to the south side in the early 1900s, The station was decommissioned, as I said, in 1973, and then there was a fire in, I believe, 1980, and the station burned. But the small building that you kind of see off to the right, tucked behind that tree, a little outbuilding storage facility, we actually have at the Michigan Maritime Museum. Upper right is the museum's long-term loan vessel, the Coast Guard Motor Lifeboat 36460. It's a 36-foot Coast Guard motor lifeboat. These were really popular in the 40s, 50s, and even through the 1980s before they started replacing them with different technologies. What's really interesting about the Coast Guard vessels that we have 4 on land and 1 in the water with 36460. You can really see the technological changes through time with how Coast Guard vessels are built with the purpose of saving more lives and getting out there faster. So it's really interesting to see those technological advances just by looking at the structure of these boats. The 36460 was the star of the Disney movie The Finest Hours, if you've had a chance to watch that. It's a wonderful movie about based on a true story of the greatest Coast Guard rescue of all time, which happened out on the East Coast when an oil tanker, the Pendleton, split in half, and a few brave guys had to go out there in a 36-footer to go save them. And it's a harrowing experience, but real heroes. So that vessel wasn't the original rescue vessel, but played the original rescue vessel in the movie. And now we've got that at the museum, and we take passengers out on that as well. We really wouldn't be who we are today if it wasn't for the incredible civil engineering projects with canals and locks and lighthouses. So the really opening up the Great Lakes to travel and commerce. In 1825, the Erie Canal connected the Atlantic to Lake Erie through the Hudson River. And you can see that on the where that is located on the map there. Shortly after that, the Welland Canal, one of the most important canals, I think, for opening up the Upper Lakes, went around Niagara Falls, and that connected Lake Ontario to Lake Erie. So now we're looking at through the St. Lawrence Seaway and continuing on through the Upper Lakes. Shortly after that, Michigan became a state. I don't think that's overly coincidental as we open things up and travel and people and commerce, getting goods out. It really just makes sense that it would then establish statehood shortly thereafter in 1837. In 1855, we have St. Mary's Falls Canal, the Soo Locks, and that's what really connected into Lake Huron and a lot more of those natural resources that we have up there in the Lake Superior area. So overall, from Lake Superior to the Atlantic, there is a total drop of 600 feet of elevation, which is pretty substantial, which is why you need lock systems in order to have vessels go through that. They obviously can't go over the falls. So having those systems, there are 16 systems from between Lake Superior to the Atlantic in total for the Great Lakes to get out into other places and into the Atlantic Ocean. So that's really, really impressive. Of course, lighthouses, aids to navigation, really important when you have more vessels out on the water. They are harbor markers as well as markers for potential catastrophes to avoid those. Michigan alone has more lighthouses than any other state at a whopping 129. Not all lighthouses are houses. As you can see from South Haven's picture here, we actually have a beacon, the lightkeeper, and then the Coast Guard following that. The lightkeeper and his family lived up in a house on the hill overlooking that, and then were in charge of making sure that lamp stayed lit and were following all of the protocol that they needed to. Some are houses where the light is connected to the house and they lived right there. So just a little bit of difference based on the situation. For South Haven in particular, this sticks way out on the jetties. It wouldn't have been possible or made any sense to really build a house connected with the light. Only 4 of the 129 have catwalks remaining. South Haven is one of them. St. Joe is another. Grand Haven has one, and Manistee. Now you'll notice all of those that I named are on Lake Michigan. Largely that's because of the weather, wave, storm action, how it affects the water on Lake Michigan, where you need that catwalk to be so much higher to get out to the lake because of how high the waves crash over. If you were just trying to keep that lamp lit, walking out on the pier head, you'd likely be swept off many a time. And I'm sure in Grand Haven, you guys are very familiar with that. And then, of course, the first Michigan lighthouse was the Fort Gratiot Light, commissioned in 1825. So if we look at that date and look back at the Canals and Locks, there's a lot of similarities of right around that, 1820s kind of period. When you have a lot of boat traffic on the water, a lot of access, you're going to have a lot of shipwrecks, a lot of accidents. So we have in the Great Lakes over 6,000 shipwrecks, which is incredible. We probably have more shipwrecks per area of coastline, per square mile of coastline than anywhere else in the world. Some of that has to do with the geography of the lakes and the way the climate affects the water. We have a unique environment between depth and width and behavior that potentially could lead to a lot of disasters. The shipwrecks that we have are all types from all periods. And because of those interesting situations, weather is the most common reason for shipwrecks. There are other things like accidents that happen, running aground, although some of that is weather related. There are, explosions, boiler explosions, fires, those sorts of things happen as well. But by far, weather is the main shipwrecks in the Great Lakes. When it comes to studying shipwrecks or learning a little bit more about shipwrecks, we have some really interesting conditions here on the bottom, our cold, fresh water, that work really as ideal preserving conditions for them. And in many deep areas of the Great Lakes, we can still see shipwrecks that are almost largely intact, some with rigging still clinging on. So it's really kind of interesting to be able to take a look at those shipwrecks, find out what happens. And we can still do that with shipwrecks that are more in the shallows, but because of the very active environment, the dynamic environment of the more shallow water, those wrecks tend to get ripped apart a little bit more. But they really do act as time capsules of our history. So the best, it's wonderful to go look at them, whether you're diving or snorkeling or kayaking or canoeing. We've got beautiful clear water, so you can see them in the shallows in many places. And certainly people should go out and enjoy them, but they're also very important parts of our history. So at the Michigan Maritime Museum, our philosophy for people is to say, take only pictures, leave only bubbles. You don't need a souvenir from a shipwreck. You don't have to take anything. You can just enjoy that and then let the next person come along and enjoy the same thing. If there happen to be artifacts on the bottom, you don't want to remove that. It changes the story. It changes the experience for other divers. And it is also illegal. Shipwrecks that are on the bottomlands belong to the state of Michigan, and in most areas along Michigan's coastline, they're part of underwater preserves as well. So they are protected as sites. And also remember, some people in some of these instances have lost their lives, so they're also grave sites. So we just ask that people be respectful and enjoy these shipwreck sites for what they are, those time capsules of history. They can look very different from one place to the next. So we have shallow water wrecks, we have beached wrecks, we have slightly deeper wrecks, and you can see that they really come in all shapes and forms, and it really is really awesome to be able to go out and take a look at these shipwrecks. If you can't tell from the sound of my voice, shipwrecks, I love them. That's why I went to school to do maritime archaeology. I just think it's such a wonderful resource and something that not everybody gets a chance to see. Although as technology improves, I think we'll see a little bit more of that, and they'll be more accessible even in a virtual way for people who aren't diving on some of these wrecks. If you do see something on the shore that you think looks like a shipwreck, we encourage you can reach out to us. Also, we have the Michigan Shipwreck Research Association that's based out of Holland. You can contact them about any shipwreck sites that you see there. And they can maybe go take a look at it, or you can certainly send us pictures. I'm always happy to see pictures of potential shipwrecks or things that you might see on the beach that you think might be maritime related. Yeah, definitely give us a call. And of course, you can always contact the state of Michigan. We have a maritime archaeologist, state maritime archaeologist, Wayne Lasardi, who I think will be giving a presentation for you guys in just a couple of months. He's always happy to hear about shipwrecks and take a look and maybe give you some information. So I encourage you to reach out and share the science with everybody. I have to talk about the museum just a little bit and who we are. We hope you'll come and visit us. We're a very place-based location. You can see our campus here. So the museum extends all the way, it hugs the corner here. There's Captain Lou's Bar and Grill that is there, separate, but the museum has all of the slips on the corner. We circle around by our Van Ort building with the red roof. Where you see the cluster of trees, we're actually going to be building a new building here that should open in June of next year. And then we go around the corner where you see the tent and then Evelyn S., the fish tug. We have our fleet of vessels out in front of our boat shed building. And then there is a municipal marina, right out in front of where our new building will be, but a lot of outside spaces, a lot of things to see and do and just enjoy our campus. Some of our exhibits, top left, our Padnos boat shed. This is a working boat shed. So we have a lot of vessels. They need maintenance, a lot of which we do in the winter time. So this is a hub of activity. We also use it as a classroom space. We do offer some boat building classes. We've had a paddleboard building class previously too, some demonstrations, workshops, things like that. Lower left is Evelyn S., which we talked about for commercial fishing. So 1939 gillnet commercial fish tug. We encourage people to go aboard and learn a little bit more about commercial fishing. Top right, our Van Ort boathouse with our Coast Guard vessels. As I mentioned before, we have 4 historic Coast Guard vessels from different periods in the facility, 1 outside the facility, as well as lots of information on the United States Coast Guard and U.S. Life Saving Service and knot tying exhibit in the small building that is original to the South Haven station. Bottom left is our antique outboard motor collection. As I mentioned, we have a small craft collection. We are renovating one of the historic Jensen buildings to be small craft and antique outboard motors. So those will be featured, and we hope to be able to open that up next summer as well. And then in the center is going to be the first main exhibit that we have in our new Maritime Heritage Center building, which is full steam ahead. We're going to talk about those beautiful passenger steamships and the passenger experience aboard them in the height of the steamship era. So we do hope that you'll come and visit us then and check out that exhibit. Our fleet, in a way, we've kind of talked about all of these vessels already. They're all at our docks at the Michigan Maritime Museum, where they go out daily, almost daily in the summertime. You can visit our website for more information on our fleet and availability. If you're looking at, coming out anytime soon, the museum is going to be closed, obviously, for the winter period and our construction. Lindy Lou, the river cruiser, she continues most of the time through October. Most of the rest of our vessels, we do have to take out for the winter months, or Friends Goodwill, for example, will be getting down rigged, where we take all the rigging, all the line and everything off of it, and then we'll shrink wrap it, and it will stay in the water over the winter. And that happens each year, and then we rig it again in the spring. So we have Friends Goodwill, Lindy Lou, the 1941 36460 Coast Guard motor lifeboat, 1929 Chris Craft Cadet, and 1921 racing yacht Bernita. And we certainly would love for you to come aboard and step aboard history with us, and we'd be happy to share any on-water experience with you. The new Maritime Heritage Center is part of phase 1 of our Launching a Legacy capital campaign. This is a rendering of what our campus will look like once we finish. So the large red roofed building there is the new Maritime Heritage Center. Some of the remaining buildings will be there. We'll be adding 2 additional docks and a point building, a boat lift and a covered boat house scenario as well. So lots of things happening as we grow as the Maritime Museum, and we will look at, hopefully if everything goes to plan, opening all of that and having everything done for summer of 2023. But of course that will depend on fundraising. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about our Launching a Legacy campaign, I again encourage you to visit our website. This is a rendering of that Maritime Heritage Center. On the far left, that whole area is the Learning Center. We'll be able to do more lectures, in-person classes, that sort of thing. We'll have a larger exhibit space, an upper floor for exhibits and events, a large atrium with other small exhibits in it as well. Lots of things to see and do, conference spaces, meeting spaces, so that we could really be a much better museum. So we're very excited. And again, we're looking at opening this new facility with our new exhibit, Full Steam Ahead, the Golden Age of Steamship Travel, in June of 2022. Please follow us on social media for all updates about the Michigan Maritime Museum, classes, opportunities, lectures, exhibits, all that kind of thing. We'd love to have you follow us. Thank you so much for joining me today for the presentation, and we hope to see you at the Michigan Maritime Museum.